Hi, it's so good to be with you all today. We are going to be talking about DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Association Leadership, as presented to the Institute of Association Leadership Forum Focus. My name is Sharon Newport, and I'm an organizational development practitioner, facilitator, executive coach. I do some speaking and educating, but I've previously been an association CEO and been in the association space for nearly a dozen years. Prior to that, I had a documentary production life and I used to be an actor. So I have a varied background, but I've always been very interested in change leadership, and I'm very excited to talk to you today about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So one of the goals for today is to explore a holistic understanding of the best practices around DEI and drawing a direct parallel to our current competencies as association executives in order to help make this content accessible, understandable, understand the framework is something that we're already operating in. This is all a journey. We're all in the beginning of the journey as we talk today. This will also lead up to our June 22nd masterclass, where we will stack upon this education with more experiential learning, use of self, and small group discussions exploring the implementation of the work and practicing to explore these crucial conversations with one another. So today we're going to explore a few agreements on how we're going to talk about this work, and I put this here as a best practice. It is important to create a brave and safe space when having these conversations. So I include some agreements that I recommend exploring. Every group wants to do it differently. This is just my series of recommendations that I'll share with you and would be best practice for our conversations in this context. We'll talk about DEI framework and capacity for the long-term journey, and any summary questions that may arise. So our suggested agreements are for today to hold this safe and brave space, remembering we're all learners, including me. I'm sure I'm going to be learning from our conversations as we start to move forward together. And leading with empathy is critical. The way you position yourself in a conversation is powerful. It creates a presence, and it certainly creates your learning journey in a way that has compassion. Using I statements when you speak is quite important. Exploring the yes and component to not negate your partners or neighbors in conversations. Step up, step back, very common phrase that's often used in facilitations. If you find yourself not participating, or if you find yourself participating a lot and making room for others. In a DEI context, we want to create the safe and brave space, and we're on a Zoom together, so participating can look like a lot of things. So it could be, were you to do this in another meeting, you could do it in the chat. It could be a raise of hands. It doesn't have to be verbal, because again, everyone's coming from a different perspective with different needs and different triggers around this work. Intent versus impact. Oftentimes we've heard the phrase, oh, I know they had the best of intentions, or please know I had the best of intentions. And that's important, it's powerful. But when we talk about DEI, and frankly, as we start to explore culture work, you'll learn that impact matters more than intent. So best of intentions and unforeseen consequences on impact, or let's be frank, it could be terrible impact, matters. And so when trying to have a conversation around, I know you had the best of intentions, unfortunately, here was the impact for me, becomes a way to include both and not negate the best of intentions, but also really dig into the exploration of the impact. And then no attribution. So when you're having these conversations, it can be important to want to share the content of those conversations with others, but to be able to remove the attribution of who said what can sometimes be what creates safety in the conversation. So one of the things I'm also modeling here is that language matters. And the priorities around the DEI space or the EDI space or D&I space are constantly evolving. And I'll prove that point in another moment, because even documents that were written just a couple of years ago have a slightly different framework were they to have been authored today. The conversations around language are evolving. And so I would just constantly put yourself in a position to seek to understand, to seek to grow, and hold lightly the fact that we're all growing very quickly. We're all on our own journeys. And the language you would like to use today might change within 30 days or 6 months, and be willing to explore that as part of your journey. So let's talk about language. Let's talk about the exploration of diversity and some of the characteristics of diversity. This is not an all-inclusive list, nor am I attempting to define the word diversity, but I do want us to think about different categories of diversity because we often run to the first step of diversity as we all perceive it, which is racial and ethnic diversity or nationality or gender identity, sexuality. But there's also neurodiversity, there's physical abilities or disabilities, there's age. In this other box on the right-hand side, language, ways of thinking, educational background, socioeconomic status, lifestyle, family status, body size or shape, as well as height. So you can imagine that when you're talking about DEI and you have one particular lane that you're thinking of, it's very easy to have other things just not quite as visible. And I would encourage you to find ways to remind yourself of the many types of visibility and invisibility around diversity. That's important to keep in mind when languaging, when being inclusive with your members, when exploring things with your staff. So let's explore some actual definitions around equality, equity, and access. Now, one of the things I will overtly just share with you now is that I have a bias for equity over equality. And so you will see in some of the ways in which I've cobbled together some definitions here that the word equity or equitable is used a couple of times because these definitions do bias moving towards equity. Do what works for you, but hopefully you can hear the value of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about the comparison of the two. So equality is meaning giving an individual or group of people the same resources or opportunities. Everyone gets the same. Whereas equity is recognizing that each person has different circumstances, different abilities, and that each of those need to be resourced differently in order to have an equal outcome. So it's again looking at impact versus intent, right? It doesn't mean that you don't believe we're all equal human beings, but we all come to this life thing differently. And sometimes those things need to be resourced differently in order to create the equal outcome for each individual. Access is often used in the disability community. It seeks to provide equitable, again, my bias for equity, equitable accessibility in any systemic framework. So removing the barriers of participation, ensuring that information, services, facilities are accessible to all. Another way to look at accessibility, if common example is if your association is only servicing CEOs and you're interested in servicing, say, those below the C-suite as members and expanding your membership, those folks don't have access. What do you need to do to access them and have them access you and create experiences that provide may or may not want an equal outcome to your CEO members, but equal outcome to one another. So here's an image from the internet. I do credit to equalitytool.com. So equity and equality, this is a common meme on the internet done out a few different ways, but I'm a very visual person. I know many folks are visual. And just a quick sidebar, my slides will have language, image. I will be reading some, I will be speaking some because everyone learns differently. It's my attempt to address the adult learning path with diverse mechanisms. Some people have different ways they process data. So equality versus equity, I love visuals. I wanted to throw this in for us. I hope this quite obviously explains how when providing equal access, everyone gets a box. It doesn't necessarily mean everyone has the same impact, nor would it mean that if you were the association providing these boxes or this ramp, are you providing an impact on your members that you're seeking? Otherwise, if we're looking at equity, it would be another way of saying we want to create as equal impact as possible. The other thing I'll throw out there is that we often do this when planning meetings and needing to plan lunch, right? We often will say, do you have any dietary restrictions? Do you have any allergies, right? And often we're probably trying to do the legal compliant thing and just keep ourselves out of trouble and make sure everyone's healthy. But ultimately, if you want the positive impact and you want everyone to have a healthy meal, you want everyone to be resourced, you need them alert for the rest of the day, the way in which you go about that might have a little more robust approach. And so little things like that is how these kinds of things can play out all across your association. So let's explore inclusion and belonging. Inclusion is the act of establishing philosophies, policies, practices, and procedures with equitable access to those opportunities and resources that support individuals that are contributing to the organization's success. Now, this final sentence, I'm not so sure I agree with, but it is very common in the definition of inclusion to have this final phrase. And so I saw it as a teachable moment, which is that inclusive organizations are by definition diverse. I don't necessarily agree that that is fundamentally true, but just know that if you're applying all of these principles inclusive of inclusion, you will find that diversity is an outcome. The other way I like to look at it is that if you are creating equity, if you are creating access, if you're seeking to create inclusion and a culture of belonging, by nature, you will have a diverse audience or membership or diverse thought that was put into it, what have you. So diversity is very much possible as an outcome rather than as an initial goal. And I would explore that. I think that is powerful and important so that you're not picking on people to fulfill diverse desires or needs, but that you're really seeking a cultural shift, which has the consequence of diversity with a number of things from both of those boxes that we talked about. Belonging. It's the feeling of being allowed, being valued, being seen by a group, fostering a sense of safety, desire for engagement, encouraging the creativity and innovation. It's really possible that some folks don't know what it's like to not belong fundamentally, but we've all experienced things where we've walked into a room or we've walked into some setting where oh gosh, I'm not sure if I belong in this one, but maybe you wanted to and needed to address that tension that you were feeling. And that's the kind of thing we don't want our members to have. I think associations are really good at exploring belonging, but with this new lens, hopefully we can take that to the next level. So I wanted to share, I'm a member of the American Society of Association Executives, and a couple of years ago, to illustrate my point about language and how ideas evolve, they created a document called the 10 Key Advantages of Diversity and Inclusion for Associations. I thought it was important to share, one, because there's some good concepts here. I'll put my credits in the slides so you'll be able to see where you can get this online. But I also thought it illustrated an interesting point around the framework for value of this, and how this was created a couple of years ago. And we can see not only do these ideas still stick, but we can see how we're looking at them potentially a little differently even a few years later, potentially with the changes of the last year and a half. Noticing the title is Diversity and Inclusion. And if they wrote it today, I would be curious as to whether that would be the way in which this was framed. So one, it creates a competitive advantage for the organization. It lowers organizational risk of litigation. It achieves a high quality, satisfied, dedicated workforce. It reduces the potential for groupthink. It supports innovation and problem solving. It enhances the organization's reputation. It increases sales and market share. Facilitates connections and community. Takes the pulse of the operating environment at less cost to the organization, and it eliminates rankism. So there's not an in crowd and an out crowd necessarily, but that everyone is a somebody. So I've sourced what they have sourced here. You can see this. You can do a search on ASAE DEI, and that link will come up for you if that's easier to access, but illustrates a point around some of the researched benefits and advantages for DEI and associations. So let's just remind ourselves of our own best practices that we operate in constantly. I think this is a key framework that is broad and holistic that we will start to stack our skills around. So our leadership is our board. Our leadership's work and framework is expressed in our governance. Our operating is expressed in our governance. Our mission and our vision is expressed in our strategy and our culture. Resources are required to deliver on these items, and data informs and supports these goals, and it creates accountability as well. The chief staff executive and the staff are association stewards. Volunteers and staff require various competencies to be effective and lead and execute their work. They are to be accountable. There are mechanisms in place for that. Communication is everything, as we well know. And belonging and emotional connection matters, and the work is an infinite journey. You can probably think of a few other things that feel like a fit within that general framework, but hopefully you're seeing the picture that I'm attempting to paint here. So let's add a layer to those best practices that also include DEI. And let's explore what it looks like to have this framework expressed with DEI. So your board would own and create the DEI mission, vision, and strategy. And it would be holistically incorporated into that of the organization. It would not be a separate thing on the side. It is inclusive and integrated. It's created with informed conversations. There is likely some education on the journey of your board. So data, perhaps some education around their own unconscious biases, exploring the best practices and the potential impact based upon the members in the industry that you serve. Again, it's woven into everything, including your ops plans, your policies, your programs, and your practices. Again, not an item on the side. It's thought of within what you have already and what you need to expand upon. So therefore, any DEI committees or task forces are not sitting on the side running the show, or as I'd like to say, wag the dog. Your board is in charge. They simply might be implementing some of the work for that year. There is ROI across everything, as we just saw from that research study from ASAE. And policies in any framework with association are not a holistic solution, they're a transactional tactic. So usually when someone says, we need to create a policy and that way everyone knows we care, and then, or make a statement and then we can move on. And my question would be, well, what happened that makes us feel that we need to take this action right now? And what's the consequence of what happened? And usually the consequence or what happened has something to do with something happened from a member, maybe to a member. So when we look at, so what is the reparation? We don't often think about how do we need to make it right for the member who was negatively impacted. We often say, well, look, we've punished the member who did something wrong. We've kicked them out. We've suspended them. So I hope you feel good about what we've done. And many times that would be fine. That would be sufficient because oftentimes it's maybe reporting someone doing bad practice or something. But around this work, it doesn't necessarily go that way. One of the examples that I sometimes throw out is that what if a member was speaking and stood up in front of a crowd and used inappropriate language that maybe it had racial slurs? The damage is to all of the crowd. So what do you do, right? And so my point is that it can look like a lot of different things. And I think those are layers you would want to consider if you need to walk down the path of a possible policy for the sake of the organization. CSEs may need to guide leadership so that they can create a vision. We know that that is sometimes true. So that means that you're going to need to be on your own journey, and you're responsible for supporting the journey of your staff as well with education and support. Earn the membership you're trying to attract. We all know that if we need to attract a new crowd or a new group or a new segment or a new demographic of membership, we have to attract them, but then we have to keep them. We have to retain them. And I would say in this case, you have to earn it. You probably always have to earn it, but it's a little differently when you're trying to create a culture of belonging for a group who maybe did make a conscious decision that they didn't belong. And now you have to say, no, but now we would like to make sure you feel you can belong, that you do belong, that you're seen, that you're valued. And we would perhaps love to have you join membership at leadership and grow into your role with us. Those kinds of journeys and paths become important to explore in these new membership communities. And then again, no one should do this alone. We association pros are really good at building community with each other. Be sure on this specific topic, you have trusted colleagues, family, friends, someone that you can, what I say, go into the vault with and say, all the things in a trusted space as much as you need to as you evolve. So I'm hoping that you're able to see these parallels to the best practices as association professionals. So let's stack one more layer here. General DEI best practices that I'm hoping you'll still see some parallels to, but I do want to get real explicit on just DEI best practices that are out there. This is not all inclusive. This is just a healthy list of a few more items. So creating safe and brave spaces in your culture. We've talked and we're hopefully modeling that a little bit now. Listening doesn't require immediate action. Be very careful about urgency bias. So this is a big one. This is a really big one, because in the context of either something happening and you're feeling like you've got to take an action, or the board has made some decisions and now you have to implement, there can be a bias for urgency, specifically with DEI. It happens to all of us all of the time, being very excited about something new and wanting to get it out there and wanting the members to see it. So we all know we have that. That's a human thing, but there is a different feeling of urgency that comes in this topic. And I would encourage you to explore and be mindful of when that might be happening to you. Urgency and going fast does not always mean that it doesn't go, or that it does go well. You don't want to create unintended consequences, especially because you've likely done a lot of work to get where you are. Just no need to undo any of that because of pace. And so you might have to have that conversation with your board. It is a normal characteristic. So sometimes boards like hearing this is normal. Associations go through this. Know that that's true. And you will probably need to be, as the CSE, calibrating that very carefully so that the pace is effective and appropriate. So learning to be uncomfortable, that's a good example. Learning to be uncomfortable, but still relational. Oftentimes in the discomfort around DEI, we can find ourselves isolating, not talking about it, scared to attempt to have another conversation because maybe the last one was really uncomfortable. It's a competency and it's a muscle. Keep going, stay relational, learn to be uncomfortable. That's part of the journey. Eventually that exact thing will be less uncomfortable over time, but there might always be something new. That's part of the human experience with this. Remember the agreements that we had today? I would explore using those or changing them, but anytime you have these conversations or anytime you're navigating yourself, keep those kinds of things in mind as you explore your own competency and language. And again, education is your responsibility. So if you were to say, well, I need someone to tell me what books to read or what webinars to go to or what classes to see, I don't think that's the best approach for each individual. The books I'm reading and the webinars I go to and the classes I attend, I'm in a very different place on my journey than you might be. And what is inordinately possible in this topic is that if I share my resources with you and you don't resonate with them, it can be an easy way to shut down because it can get overwhelming. And nobody wants to do that to each other, right? And so take your curiosity and run to Google and just start exploring things. You will find there is a plethora of things out there. Start exploring what works for you and ease your way, take responsibility for your journey and ease your way in at a pace that you feel has a little bit of a comfort zone while exploring a learning zone. And we'll talk more about that later. Know your organization's majority and marginalized populations. So know your data. And you might start anecdotally, but it will be part of creating bigger strategy to understand demographics of your membership. So again, sharing those things with leadership for a possible preferred future, and then certainly having your own opinions and discernment about what's possible for the organization as you would with any topic walking into the boardroom. A big best practice, and it does use the word us, and it's not referring to necessarily my demographic, but this is the key phrase, and it's a good one to remember. And it's frankly a good one to remember as an association executive in general. Don't build for us without us. That could be true for, again, that example of you serve associations or you serve CEOs and you want to serve management. Would you build membership for management level people without the voices of that crowd? Probably not, right? So you would want to do the same thing here, and that might cross racial lines, national lines, language lines, exploring that is really powerful and important, and how you approach that we would talk about more in the masterclass. Learning your biases, which will evolve over time, and learning your privileges, or how to be an ally or a champion or a sponsor for others, is a powerful use of yourself and what you can give to others. And we've talked about being conversant. It's going to evolve over time. Language is going to evolve. What you decide you're comfortable saying today will be different from 6 months. So hold that lightly as you explore the journey. Again, having safe community. One thing I will say about safe community is that it's okay. And it's probably, I would even say it's a best practice when you're new on the journey, to have community that is homogenous to you, however you define that. Before you become intersectional in that community. So that way you are having a safe space to go and say, I just made this mistake. I don't even know how to clean it up. I'm mortified. You need to do that with people who, what you deem are similar to you. If that is Black females, if that is white males, if that's your age. But I would look at the category of issues that you want to talk about and say, who's homogenous to me? Maybe I use that as a starting community for myself. And these communities, any community is not singular. There's going to be folks in what you deem as your community that have divergent thought processes, divergent approach. They're in a different place in their journey. So that'll be part of the exploration as well. And just hold that really lightly as you explore, because mistakes will happen and guilt is normal. And so just be very careful about how you manage those emotions or seeking forgiveness. And we'll explore that in the masterclass as we explore doing the thing, because you just don't want to make it so that you center yourself in any apology or request for forgiveness. You really are trying to center the person that you owe this apology or forgiveness towards. Change or transformation can only happen relationally with action. It's not about intent, it's about impact. So let's just take a quick pause. That might have been a lot for you. So how are you doing? Do you need to take a deep breath? Do you need to step back and think for a minute? Do you need to, are you right here? Are you kind of up to your neck in all of these best practices? Any answer is okay, because again, it's all a journey. There is no right or wrong. The goal is to continue to stay on the path. And I do want to share a brief framework that is important for us to all explore. So there is what's called the learning zone when exploring new concepts that could move us between comfort and panic. And there is that green space on this graphic where we see the learning zone. You do need a little bit of stress and pressure to come up out of a comfort zone in order to get to a learning space. And you can see that it can look like different things on the spectrum. We all have explored different scenarios like this, but just know it's okay to have some of that stress or pressure, or what they're calling panic, balanced against your comfort in order to have that middle space. So this will be fundamentally new and different in that kind of way. And so know that that's also a norm that will evolve for you over time. And lastly, I'm just going to leave you with this little resource that I thought was helpful. In my Google journey, I explored it. Allyship is something that you can find this online at Guide to Allyship. And these are just some key components that we've already talked about, but I thought it was a good way for me to start to practice this in the world, so that I share that with you. This was not all inclusive. I hope you like the parallels that we've explored today. Thank you so much for your time. And Andrew, it's good to be with you. I'm glad to have this conversation.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. So obviously, colleagues who are watching this will know that this is a recorded version of the forum that you delivered yesterday, and certainly, I know that what you spoke about yesterday and today has had hugely resonated with colleagues who are in attendance, and I think you're, for want of a better phrase, I think we're pushing at an open door here in terms of our industry, our sector, needing and wanting to learn and know more about how we can enact cultural change, but monument. I mean, we talk a lot about culture change, behavior change, and I think often the terms that are bandied around, arguably, I think they're thrown around too easily, because actually we are talking about I would suggest, monumental cultural change in our sector. So, and I think it's really important that colleagues, recognize that we are just on the start of a journey. I hate the J word. I can't believe you've got me using the J word. I hate it. Oh, the journey. It's like it's like X Factor. I'm on a journey. Yeah. But I'm gonna stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
Or maybe you could stop sharing your screen.
Yeah,
I don't want to. There we go. There we go. Right. Okay, we're on the screen. Right, excellent. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, we've obviously had conversations before today. We're not coming into this blind, as it were. But a few, as you're talking through it, I'm thinking, yeah, this all makes sense. I'm not looking at it thinking, oh my God, what? Where's that coming from?
Right.
But constantly at the back of my mind here, and I can only talk about it from my perspective. I have no right to talk about it from anybody else's perspective. But I'm looking at it thinking, imposter syndrome is just bouncing around. I'm sitting there thinking, I'm a fraud. I'm going to be a fraud to be talking about cultural change, inequality and diversity, inclusivity, equity, access, because, and I know this is I'm allowed to say this, I'm not quite pale, male and stale, but I'm certainly pale and male. I'd like to think I'm not stale yet, but I'm sitting here thinking, the point around allyship, I love, but I sit there and I think, I'm going to feel a fraud if I do that. I'm going to feel like this is some kind of, like I'm an imposter. Is that fair of me? Am I just overthinking it? Am I overanalyzing?
So in fairness, that's a normal feeling at a certain stage in the process, right? So before attempting the work, the feelings of fear or imposter, or I shouldn't be the one, I can't be the one, why would it be me? No one's going to listen to me. That kind of self-talk is pretty normal. But I would say that the power that you would have as a white male talking to perhaps another group of white males about the importance of this work and saying with deep authenticity, because that's who you are, right? Deep authenticity, I'm new to this too, but I believe in it. I'm trying it. I'm giving it a go. And one of the ways in which I'm doing that is having this conversation with you right now, right? Like, use the moment for what it is. It doesn't mean that you're supposed to show up perfect or well-versed or, a powerful leader. Absolutely not. The one conversation is allyship unto itself. And it's the behavior of it rather than the any other underlying feelings that would stop the behavior. The behavior will create the work.
Okay. Like I said, I do believe you. I do. I am a believer.
Okay. Well, you want to dig into that a little further?
Yeah, I do a wee bit, because again, I'm thinking, right, okay, obviously this is the introductory piece before the masterclass on the 22nd. And if you're watching this after the 22nd, where were you? But also, you can obviously, I think, will there be a recording of the masterclass? I don't know.
We agreed not to.
Okay, there's no recording of the masterclass, so, well, sucks to be you if you weren't there. But okay, so
this is exactly what we'll be doing in part of the masterclass.
Well,
do the thing.
Do it, yeah. Can we get into this a wee bit? Because I am, if I ended this call now, I'd walk away and I'd still be thinking, I get this on paper. I totally know what Sharon's talked about. I absolutely agree with Sharon. But get into it with me a wee bit.
Yeah. So what has you feeling like? Tell me a little bit more. Say more about the imposter or it maybe shouldn't be me. Tell me more about that for you.
Well, I think because of my demographic, I am a white male. We talk about privilege. White middle class male with opportunities, that are afforded to me that aren't afforded to other ethnicities or genders or race, or and I sit and I think, should I be talking? Can I talk with any authority on issues around equality and access, equity and access, when actually it's not been really been a problem for me? I've never experienced. I have no direct experience of the challenges and the issues that more people than not have experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of where I was talking about, like, use where you are,
Yeah.
that exact phrase that you shared about I have not had the challenges or those experiences, you're not attempting to speak as though you did, right?
True. Mm-hmm.
Right? You're attempting to speak as though I have not had those challenges or experiences, right? So we can only speak from the seat we sit in, right?
Yeah.
So your experiences in this world and my experiences in this world, I think we could have lots of chat about how that's been very different for a number of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't necessarily talk about what it's like to have not had those experiences, but I can tell you we all have boxes that we can check around privilege. So for example, I have straight privilege. I have cisgender privilege, right? So I don't know what it's like to walk down the street and be with my partner who is maybe of the same sex, and I'm worried about my safety. I don't know what that's like. That's not an experience that I've had, but I can still stand for LGBTQ rights because I believe in them. I don't sit in that seat. I don't know what it's like to not have the experiences that many folks in those communities have, but I stand for them. I believe in them. I will ally for them. I will use my privilege to help them come through doors, to help them have platforms, to help them get equity, to get access. So that's how I do it. And I would say from your same seat of never having experienced certain things, that's the exact conversation you would want to have, and to say, and I recognize not everyone recognizes that privilege, Andrew. I don't know if you, right? No, not everyone recognizes that I've not had to do that before, X, Y, or Z, whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that conversation is a huge eye opener for a lot of people. And sometimes people need to hear it from the people that are homogenous to them.
Yeah.
So
no, that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Right? The power of using the seat you're in and the wide angle lens you've now been able to apply to this world and say, guys, it doesn't look like this. I promise you, it looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
And let me explain why, because you've learned a competency, Andrew. You've learned how to talk about this. You've learned that it looks like this for some people. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Doesn't look like that for us. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's what allyship could start to look like. Does that feel more authentic to your seat?
Yeah, it does. It does actually. Yeah. When you put it in those terms, I suppose arguably when you rationalize it for me.
Yeah. Can I dig into that for a
Yeah,
quick?
please do.
Yeah. So, neurologically, when we experience something that frightens us, we go back into that old kind of dinosaur part of our brain that wants us to run. And so we shut down the executive functions and the thinking, and we go into like, gotta get out. I'm so freaked out, gotta get out.
Sounds like every board meeting I've ever been in.
Right. So we all know that feeling very well while sitting in the presence of others who might even be in suits.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right?
No, yeah. True.
Like no dinosaur around, but just a whole bunch of people. And,
yeah. Better dressed than me. Yeah.
You want to just run and get out. Right. Well, that can happen in these conversations, or even in the education of this, is that for one, we all have different triggers. And sometimes we don't know the triggers exist until they happen. What becomes very important as part of the journey is being able to notice, okay, I'm having a hard time with this one, and I can't even explain why. It doesn't matter, but I've noticed I'm getting a little hot. I'm having a hard time focusing. There can be things that happen to our body even, or our ability to like learn, that you just go, I'm not here right now. And that's when you take that pause. And that's part of what we'll talk about more in the masterclass as well, is that you got to take a pause. You got to give yourself a break, step away, just don't leave.
Yeah.
Don't walk away from the journey. And the big thing that people can tend to do is get also the opposite end of the spectrum, is get overly enthusiastic when they start learning, and then overwhelm themselves, and then like step away for a while. Like that was a lot. I don't like, I went and did the webinar, and then I read the book, and now I'm overwhelmed. It's only been 2 days. And now,
I thought the piece where you were talking about urgency bias, I mean obviously that resonates across the association piece, not just in this area, but yeah, you see that a lot, and I think that can lead to almost a what's the word, urgency bias leading to sort of subject fatigue almost. It's like,
Oh,
I need
absolutely.
to check out now because this is just over. Yeah, I am overwhelmed because I've just thrown myself into it. And I do see that time and again with colleagues. Yeah, that also resonated with me but it all resonated with me, Sharon. I'm not, but I thought that was really interesting. And actually, one of the things, when you put up the slide there about the ASA's research from a few years ago, I thought it was fascinating, and I only quickly looked at the because it was in really, really small type print, and even though I'm not stale, I'm like, oh my god, what?
Yeah.
When I was looking at the references for that piece of research, a lot of that dated back to, there was references to 1991 and 2008, and I was looking at that's 30 years ago, and surely there must have, are we saying that there's been not that research hasn't been conducted between 1991 and 2021? I mean, is it?
Yeah, so in fairness, I can't say it has or hasn't.
No, not yet.
Right. But what I will say is two points that I want to point out about that. One is, did we know research was being conducted 30 years ago about this? That would surprise some people.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah, that would, yeah.
Right? That would surprise, like, oh gosh, 30 years ago, people were thinking about this? Yes, in fact, right? Two, I think it also illustrates why some of it does feel a little older than the moment, but still relevant, right? Is that some things are a little older. And I would say that what the research needs to be now, whether it's being done or not, I don't know, probably looks different.
Yeah.
Because you can hear in a lot of those statements that you're trying to almost prove the business case and the legal client and keep yourself out of hot water. And we don't think about it that way the same anymore, right?
I'm so glad you said that, because as I was looking at it, I was thinking, well, if this is, and our colleagues in ASA, the last thing we want to do is be disparaging of their research, because they've done some.
I think God did it, because we need
exactly.
a business case. Absolutely.
But when I'm looking at it, I was thinking, well, if this is sort of, and it probably isn't done in any sort of priority order, but presentation goes a long way. And I was looking at it thinking, well, it's interesting that, kind of the first point on this 10 point sort of piece is around, protecting the business as opposed to the humanity of it.
Well, and I think in fairness, their suite of materials would maybe illustrate more of the humanity. So I don't want to.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right. But you have a point that the business case has long been the thing that many of us have had to lean on, because the human value component was too hard of a challenge to hurdle.
Yes. And I think that's true. However, across a lot of aspects of associations business, I think, I think how we define our return on investment has evolved significantly, probably in the last, well, like so many things in the last 18 months, but certainly I think in the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen sort of a maturity and understanding and how people define their ROI. And I can't imagine, as you say, if ASA published that as a 5-point piece, I imagine now it would all be the human element, the humanity around it. Well, I would like to think, and I know in ASA as I do, I think, because I'm also a member, bizarrely, of the ASAE. So, and we've given them loads of plugs, but don't join the ASE, join the IAL. What's wrong with you?
IAL. Join both.
Look at the camera, IAL. Other membership organizations are available.
Well done.
Thank you. So, and I think the other piece sort of, and I've had a lot of conversations about data recently and evidence-based decision making and evidence-based development, and I think it's really, again, that piece that you highlight around data. I think historically we've been quite poor in understanding the quality and the value of our data as organizations. We tended to sort of, either we've collated data that doesn't really mean anything, or if we have collected it, we've not really done anything with it. And I'm starting to see now, and you'll be seeing this as well, the trend toward evidence-based decision making in how we are leading our associations. And that's not to say, our colleagues in the IAL haven't been using evidence in their decision making, but I think a lot of the time boards of directors have been more reliant on their chief exec and their senior staffers to provide them with guidance rather than actually immersing themselves in the data piece. And I'm starting to see more appreciation of the value of data and how we use it at board level, which I love. I think it's exactly the type of that's what we should be using. And I think an interesting piece would be to, not for now, but I think something that the IAL should think about exploring. And I say it as though I'm not involved in the IAL. I'm talking about the third person. Is what type of data is valuable?
Yeah.
And what are we going to do with it once we've got it? What are we going to do with it? And I think that's something we could we could explore that on another session and then some. But I'll just that's my take. Well, those are all my takeaways, and thank you for having like a mini training counseling session with me in front of everybody. I'm just totally out there, my heart on my sleeve. But
love it.
I would like to take the opportunity to thank you again thank you for recording this session for your one-person audience today. But I know that feedback from the live session was phenomenal. Sharon Live and Unplugged went down extremely well, and it resonates with so many people. And I know that this is the start of a conversation that we are going to continue, because I think just again the journey is infinite, as you said in one of your slides. So I really appreciate your time today, and I'm looking forward to us doing more together as we move on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Take care.
Great. Take care.